Well, hello. I want to welcome you once again to another version of our Bible Fellowship videos here on YouTube and through Chihawa Hills Baptist Church. And I'm coming to you from a little different location today. I'm actually standing in the Fusion Bible Fellowship classroom. I figured I would mix it up a little bit and maybe during some of these videos visit some of the various classrooms and just do the videos from there. So if you're a member of the Fusion class and you're watching this, maybe this will feel a little bit like home. And if you are unfamiliar with what goes on in some of the other classes, then maybe this will just give you an idea that we do have a variety of classes specifically for our adults. And so may just have a little fun with that and moving around as we go over the next weeks. We're about to start a brand new series as we begin Labor Day weekend coming up. We're starting a series that has to do primarily with, out of the Old Testament, primarily with the Ten Commandments. And it's very interesting. We talk about the Ten Commandments. We want to make sure that we don't just dismiss that we don't just look at it as some set of old rules or something that doesn't apply to us, because certainly the Ten Commandments is very applicable to us. It serves as a barometer for us. It serves as a guide for us. In fact, without getting too much ahead of ourselves, but the Ten Commandments really serve as a measuring stick by which we can place our lives and to say, I'm lacking, this is where I'm weak. And it really, in essence, provided the platform for Jesus to come and say, look, I can give you forgiveness of sins. I can give you meaning and purpose in life. I can do for you all that you were trying to do in obeying the law. So when we talk about the Ten Commandments, we really talk about a list of things that are impossible to keep. Now you might say, well, some of these I'm pretty good. I don't plan on murdering anybody and so forth. But other ones really are something that would be a little bit, shall we say, easier for us to get tripped up on. And so we need to really understand what these commandments represent and the fact that they, as a whole, are impossible for us to obey for all of eternity during our lives. And so we understand that there's a lacking and a weakness in our lives that only Jesus could fulfill. And so when we begin this series, we're talking about this idea of God having preeminence, God being first in our lives. And so we're going to start in Exodus chapter 20, and we're going to look at some of the opening verses where we before we even start listing the commandments, we're going to read a very important passage that the Lord inspired Moses to write as he was creating this list. And it's something that we cannot overlook when we talk about the Ten Commandments. Sometimes people might say, well, so who gave the Ten Commandments? What does that really mean? Who wrote this Bible, and who provided this list of do's and don'ts for us? And so we need to understand, of course, that those were words that came from God. And so we're going to start in Exodus chapter 20, the first 6 verses. And so think about this when we're talking about this idea of the Lord having preeminence in our lives and Him being God. And so we start at Exodus chapter 20 in verse 1. And the Bible says this, "And God spoke all these words," of course, speaking these words to Moses, saying, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me." And then he goes on to say, "You shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the 3rd and 4th generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments." And so let's really start right there. That introduction to what we really see as that first commandment, "You shall have no other gods before me," really begins with this idea in verse 2, when God says, "I am the Lord your God." And so that's what he says. First of all, I'm God, and I'm your God. And then he goes on to say, well, what did I do? Who am I to you? Well, not only did the readers understand that God was sovereign, God was the creator and so forth, but he played a very intricate role in the lives of the Hebrews. And he said, "I'm the one that brought you out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of bondage." And he speaks to their history, and he talks about himself as a deliverer. He talks about himself as the one, be the only one that would have the power to do such a thing, to deliver the children of Israel out of Egyptian captivity and bondage. And we don't have a lot of time to go into all that, but we understand that was part of Israel's history when Egypt held them captive and put them into slave labor and so forth. And it was God, who ultimately ushered in their kind of the defeat of the Egyptians and the escape. And then when the Egyptian army chased after them, God, through miraculous events, put that down and allowed the Hebrew children, the children of Israel, to ultimately make their way to the promised land. And so it was only God, him and him alone, that had the power to do that. And not only did he have the power, but it demonstrates that he had the actual concern for the people. He was involved in their lives, individually certainly, but as a nation, as a whole. And it really gives us a picture of God's role with us as humanity. God is the one that serves as our deliverer. God is the one that can take us out of bondage and take us out of captivity. He's the only one. Just as Israel could not escape Egyptian captivity in and of their own strength and means, we can't escape the captivity, the bondage that comes with sin. And so it was God who was the deliverer, just as it's God in the person of Jesus Christ and his atonement that paid the ransom for us and allowed us to get out of that captivity of bondage to sin. And so that being said, he said, this is the basis upon which I make this claim. This first thing I need to tell you is that you will have no other gods before me. I like the fact that he talks about himself as a jealous God. He said, I'm a jealous God. Jealousy in this sense is not unwarranted. You know, sometimes we get jealous of something or somebody. And a lot of that stems from our own insecurities. A lot of that stems from, am I worried that someone's going to hurt me or do something against me or be untruthful to me? Am I worried that there's something going on that I don't know about? Well, God doesn't have to worry about those things. God understands that there is only one God. He's it, and there is no comparison. And so it sounds from a human perspective like, well, isn't jealousy bad? Isn't God sinning and being a jealous God? Well, that's not the case, because this is warranted. God is literally telling them, there's no one else besides me. And so he has that divine right and authority to say, this is how you act towards me. This is how you treat me, because I'm the only God. And he goes on to say, obviously, when he talks in verse 3, have no other gods before me. Verse 4, don't make for yourself carved images. That's a classic example of man trying to reach God, trying to reach divine status, trying to place something in his path that he can worship. And any God that is created by human hands and out of our own wisdom, our own thoughts, and our own minds, obviously doesn't compare to the one true God. So God has every right to say, you're kind of foolish if you're trying to create a God, a carved image for you to worship, because I am the God. I'm the God that created all the items and implements and tools that you are using to create this God. If you carve it out of wood, God said, I created trees. If you carve it out of stone, God said, I created the planets and the earth and the very ground that you walk on. And so even the very fact that you have the ability to, in your mind, design an image and to create, that all came out of how God created you and the ability that you have to think and to design. And so he has every right to say that he's a jealous God. He talks about, it's interesting, he talks about, in verse 5, I, the Lord God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. And people get a little tripped up by that. But the contrast is in verse 6, but showing mercy to thousands, and that the word thousands doesn't mean thousands of people. It refers back to the generations that were talked about in the previous verse. So you can just write that in there, showing mercy to thousands of generations to those who love me and keep my commandments. This is a literary device that the Lord is using when he's speaking to Moses. He said, yes, there will be punishment in this particular description. He says, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. And that would be a bad thing, obviously. But he's contrasting that with his mercy that he gives to people. And he said the mercy is extended to thousands of generations, not just 3 or 4. So he's really drawing this contrast between that punishment and then this amazing mercy that he has to offer people. And who is he to offer that mercy to thousands of generations? Well, it's one that is God. It's one that will be around that length of time. Anybody can live over 3 or 4 generations, but if you're in position to do something for thousands of generations, that must mean you're around for a long time. And of course, that's speaking of the eternal God. And so he's very serious when he talks about this idea that he is God and he alone is God. He is the one that then has the right to then put these rules down, to put these limitations or restrictions, these encouragements, if you will, this set of guidelines. He has every right to do those things because he is God. And so it's really important for us to understand when we talk about the Ten Commandments, we're really talking about matters of the heart. And so please, as we go through this series, don't get this confused with a checklist that you have and you go down the list and say, didn't do that, didn't do that, I did do that, I did do that, and you check off the list. The Ten Commandments are really a way for us to measure what's in the heart. All of the actions that we could either avoid doing if they're bad or to do if they are good, all of those are outward manifestations, but of something that's in the heart. And again, we talked about the fact that this would be impossible to keep this set of rules for our entire lives. Why? Because what is in our heart is just naturally self-serving. It's naturally a sinful aspect of ourselves that wants to please our own desires and seek out what is best for us. And so, again, this set of rules serves as a barometer, and it's handed down to us by a righteous and holy God who has every right to stipulate the ways that we are supposed to live. But again, it's about much more than just checking off a list. It's about using these things to understand where our heart is. In other words, if you just live your life without ever murdering anybody, then you can say, I've checked off this list, thou shalt not murder. But if you have repeatedly had in your heart hatred and animosity and even an inner desire to take someone's life out of rage or out of anger or even out of sinful jealousy or whatever the case may be, just because you haven't technically murdered, your heart is in the wrong place. And didn't Jesus come to fulfill those words when he came to say, if you think about murdering, if you have murder in your heart, then you're guilty as though you had done it. And he's really talking about this idea of the heart. So all of this comes from a God who is righteous and just and can certainly have the authority to tell us what to do and how to live. And so we're going to switch over to a couple passages in the book of Psalms. Psalm chapter 16 is what we're going to look at, and a couple of these things. And we're looking at how David understood his role before God and what he really thought about God. David's a great example of a person to follow because, boy, he struggled. He was a great man. He was a leader. He was a warrior. He was obedient to God at many levels, but boy, he had some failures, didn't he? He had some situations where he decided to put his own self and his own needs above what God wanted him to do. He had periods that we see in the scriptures where he was literally on high, just vanquishing the enemies. And he had periods in the scriptures where he's just at a low valley, where he's been defeated. And he writes about a lot of those things in the Psalms. And he really opens up his heart. And again, when we're talking about the Ten Commandments, we're talking about matters of the heart. So let's look at a couple of these things that David talks about, specifically related to his viewpoint about God and having first place in every aspect of his life. So in Psalm 16:1 through the first part of verse 4, he writes this: "Preserve me, O God, for in you I put my trust. O my soul, you have said to the Lord, you are my Lord. My goodness is nothing apart from you. As for the saints who are on the earth, they are the excellent ones in whom is all my delight. Their sorrows shall be multiplied who hasten after another God." You hear that? Your sorrows are multiplied if you hasten after or pursue or chase after another God. So as we introduce that 16th Psalm, we see very clearly that David is talking directly to God. He's writing this hymn or this saying directly to the Lord, as though he's having a conversation with him. And at a spiritual level, he is. His writing is a matter of pouring out his heart. These are the things that he feels and believes and senses and understands about God and God's role in his life. He's just putting them down in paper. And so he said he understands that God is one who would preserve him. If I'm going to be preserved or protected, Remember, David is a mighty warrior. David is a leader of men. He's a conqueror of armies. He's the one who slayed the giant Goliath. He understands what it means to be victorious. If anybody can preserve himself, it would probably be David. And yet David comes before the Lord and says, God, it's you in whom I put my trust, and it's you who I rely on to preserve me. That's a real helpful tip there for us, because most of us aren't mighty warriors like David, and we might not have this sense of self-confidence, or even being overly confident in our own abilities and strength. And sometimes we do struggle with that. And yet David, who could have bragged about a lot of things, understood that it was preservation that came from God. He had to put his trust in God. And he says, "O my soul, you have said to the Lord, you are my Lord." He says, my goodness is nothing apart from you. David understood that anything good in him, any good action or deed that he could possibly bring forth, all of that was because of God. Are you getting that picture? He understands that God is on his throne, that God is the one that gives him protection, that God is the one that gives him strength and support, that God is the one that gives him any good gift, anything in his life that's worth bragging about or worth using or serving, all comes from God. And listen to that verse 4 again. Their sorrows, these saints who are on the earth, he said, their sorrows will be multiplied if they chase after another god. David understood that, and he's writing this to his fellow human beings, but certainly the fellow Jews. And he said, if we chase anything other than the one true God, we will bring sorrow upon ourselves. That's a great reminder for us today, isn't it? Any other god that we chase after is going to result in sorrow for ourselves. And so the lesson here, the point here for us, is that we must put God first in all things. Now, all things there quite literally means all things. So any other thing that you chase after in place of God is ultimately going to bring sorrow to you. Now you say, well, that's just doom and gloom. How can you even say that? I know a lot of people, they're chasing after God or chasing after their own selfish desires and pursuits. They don't have any time for God. And look at all the blessings they've received in life. Look at all the stuff they have. Look at the money in their bank account. Look at their successful children. Look at their great name. Look at them. They're great donors to hospitals and universities, and they're held in high esteem in the community. How can you possibly say that the sorrows will be multiplied if they hasten after or pursue another God besides the God of Israel? Well, remember, this life is just a snapshot. It's just a picture in time. We go through our whole lives, even though everything looks great. And that doesn't happen to everybody. In fact, there is nobody that has no sorrow and nothing bad that happens to them. But even if in your scenario you said, I see that person that everything goes their way, they don't chase after God. They chase after their own gods of self, gods of money, gods of power, gods of prestige, gods of temptation and lust and negative things as well. But no matter what they do, nothing seems to go wrong in their lives. We know that's not the case, but even if we think that and believe that, one day their life will come to an end. And if they're not chasing after the God of Israel, then sorrow will befall them. And we understand that to be true. That's why it's so important for us to evangelize. That's why many times it's more important to talk to the up and out instead of the down and out. Yes, everybody needs redemption. Everybody needs salvation. But oftentimes when people are down and beaten up and depressed and hurting, they're open to salvation. And the people who have everything going on right in their lives sometimes are really hesitant to listen to God because they don't think they need that. And just like David could have easily been excused away to say he didn't need God. And yet he understood, despite his power, despite his position as king, besides being a great military leader, and besides being a man that even God described as a man after his own heart, all of those things going for him, David understood he could not do this thing alone. And so he understood that if you chase up any other God other than the God of Israel, there will be sorrow. And so he moves on to, we're going to skip up to verses 9 through 11, when he continues this idea of his place before God and who God is. Verse 9, he says this, therefore my heart is glad and my glory rejoices. My flesh also will rest in hope. For you will not leave my soul in Sheol, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption. You will show me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. There's a lot of poetic writing in there, but really the picture that David is talking about is placing all of your trust in the Lord and understanding who he is and putting him first in your life results in this. My heart is glad and my glory rejoices. Now, he doesn't say always, but generally speaking, there's gladness of heart. There's reason for rejoicing. There's great hope in this relationship with the Lord that places him first and us second. But remember what I just said. What about that guy or gal that has everything going for them at the end of their earthly journey? Even if they've had zero problems in life, at the end of their earthly journey, there'll come a reckoning. And this is what David talks about. My flesh also will rest in hope. Even at the end of my journey, I have this great and tremendous hope. You will not leave my soul in Sheol. And that's a picture of that separation for eternity from the Lord. It's other translations say, you will not abandon me to Sheol. And it just means you're not going to just forget me and leave me there, and you're going to go off to eternity in heaven without me. He's talking about after this journey is over, because God has had first place in his life. He's got hope far beyond the ups and downs of this life and this short time on earth. But after it's all over, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption. He's really talking about God's purpose and plan, not only for him, but for the Messiah. And all of this is going to come together. The idea that there will be a Savior coming, this Holy One, that will not be allowed to see corruption, but will defeat the enemy. And it is in him where David is going to find this ultimate victory. You will show me the path of life, and in your presence is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. All of this poetic writing that really talks about the benefits of living life in such a way that God has first place in every aspect. Now, it's really important for us to understand that, because a lot of times we think about God having first place, and maybe in our theological thinking, we've got him in first place, or maybe other areas of our lives, he's in first place, but there are other areas where maybe he's in second place. And quite frankly, there's other areas where he's in fifth or eighth or 30th place. And we need to be very careful that we understand what David understood. Every aspect of my life. And you say, well, David wasn't perfect. David had sins, and there were times when he didn't place God first. That's true. And what happened? Sorrows were heaped upon him. And he came to a place of brokenness, didn't he? He came to a place where he had to say, God, I'm sorry. I put you in my mind and in the way I live obediently. I put you back as in first place in my life. You see, just because we don't put God first doesn't mean he's not first. It's about our response and us acknowledging that he is there, and acknowledging that if we ignore that and choose differently, then there are going to be consequences that take place. So this is just a great introduction to understanding this whole idea of the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments are not given by some mean, evil ogre in the sky who just says, I want to take any possibility of fun in your life and just obliterate it. That's not what the Ten Commandments are about. The Ten Commandments do come as a way for God to demonstrate in full righteousness that he is God, and that he needs to have preeminence and first place in our lives. And then the corresponding actions in us is fully living that way as though he does have first place in our lives, and understanding when we fall short that we come back to him again and again and again. Aren't you glad that God is a God that will be there for thousands of generations and working in and through the lives and hearts of people? Aren't you glad for his mercies? Aren't you glad the judgment from a broken commandment doesn't go on forever, but that he offers forgiveness and mercy even when we fall short of these commandments that we're going to be looking at. So let's use that as our foundation as we move forward. When we go to specific commandments as we talk through this series, bring yourself back to this. God has the right to tell me that. God has every right to lay that stipulation down, whether it's something I'm to avoid or something I'm supposed to do. Go back to this idea. There's great sorrow from not putting God first. There's consequence to that. There's great joy from living in such a way that he has preeminence. He's God, and he again has every right to say the things that he's going to be sharing with Moses, and of course by extension with us as we make our way through this series. Well, thank you for tuning in. I want to invite you to continue to tune into these videos as we work through these series. And the Ten Commandments is something that you can even share with friends, maybe even people who aren't believers or very familiar with church life. They've probably heard of the Ten Commandments. And so look for ways to share some of this information and let people be challenged and think about some of the things that we're going to be covering over the next weeks. Well, as I said in the introduction, we are coming up on Labor Day weekend. And so I hope that if you are traveling this week, maybe getting away, taking a break, going to the lake, whatever you're doing, I hope and pray that you're safe. If you are able to, and maybe you're normally at church on Sunday morning, please be sure to bring your laptop or tune in on your iPod or your phone or something and be part of our worship experience at 10:30 on Sunday morning. But if you are here in town and you do feel up to it, then certainly we would love to see you here at church on Sunday morning. We've got some exciting things coming up. We shared some of that in our annual meeting last week. And so we've just got some other facilities things, some painting going on, some carpet issues that we're going to be looking at in the very near future, and just updating and upgrading the look of our facility. And all that is important for us in maintaining the house of the Lord. And so we're excited about some of those things. But we're also excited that on the 13th, unless something drastic happens between now and then, but on September 13th, we are going to be opening up a nursery and a kids church during that 10:30 to noon time frame during worship. Still no Bible fellowship yet. We still may be a month or so off before we can start meeting in those groups, but we are going to test the waters, so to speak. And so there will be some information coming out to you by the time you read this or listen to this video. Maybe you've already received those emails. But if you're a parent of one of our children or preschoolers, then please make sure you understand what we're doing with the safety precautions and that sort of thing. The biggest thing is that you need to pre-register your children because we're going to limit the number of kids we can have in each room. And so it would really help our team if we know how many kids are showing up at each area, and we need to make sure we've got everything prepared. And so that information will be coming to you. If you haven't already read through it, make sure that you're checking those emails. And if you haven't received that, by all means, contact Wendy Johnston here at the church office and let her know, or Jennifer Jackson, let them know that you need some of that information. But I'm excited about being able to gradually move back to some of those things. We're going to be having a few more people on the platform this morning with our worship team as that begins to slowly expand a little bit more. And we're working our way towards when we can finally get up and running back the way that we like to do, and I believe even better. And so continue to pray for us, and as we as church leaders continue to pray for you. And together we will wade through these difficult waters, and we know that God is in control. And so we just want to be safe and smart as we work our way back towards regular habits and patterns of worship. So I hope you have a great Labor Day weekend. And again, if you're traveling, be safe and be smart. And we will see you very soon. Thank you again for tuning in. Have a great day.